For me, herbalism has always been first and foremost about the plants and wanting to have a relationship with the plants and wanting to understand them better. So in some ways, that's very selfish because it's about my experience first and foremost. But when I realized like the profound and amazing experiences that you can have with plants, I also I felt like this overwhelming desire to share it with other people.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm joined by Kiva Rose. Welcome to the show, Kiva.
Thank you, Mason.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time today. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've had some of these questions for you for years now, so it'll be exciting to kind of hear a bit of your background and everything. So first of all, I'm curious if you could kind of tell us about a first plant that you had a relationship with as a child.
Man, my earliest pictures that my mom took of me are me outdoors. I was born in Miami, Florida, so there's a lot of plants there. And in our yard, she has so many pictures of me messing with all of these bushes and tropical flowers. And we were surrounded by really beautiful plants. But it's funny because one of the very first plants that I remember, there's two actually. And one is like a mustard family plant. And they called it wild pepper. And it's been so long that I don't know exactly what it is, if it was shepherd's purse or what it was. But whatever it was, I loved it. And I would collect it. And my mother was always having to take it out of my pockets because I was obsessed with it. And another one was yarrow, which was a little bit later. And I've written a little bit about that because I was really fascinated by the feathery leaves. But then I had a bike wreck one day on our street, and we lived in a barrio. And this abuela, this grandmother woman, came out and helped me because my knees were all bleeding and scraped up from the bike wreck. And she actually used yarrow leaves to help stop the bleeding. And that was one of my first real herbal experiences. I was like, man, I don't remember, 5.
Wow.
And it was wow, this is magic. This is Tolkien level magic, man.
Were you into Tolkien back then?
Oh yeah, my parents were very into fantasy stuff, and especially Tolkien. And I learned to read when I was very young, when I was about 3 years old, I think. And some of the first things I taught myself to read was Tolkien, even though I certainly didn't understand a lot of it at that time. But I was definitely very elf obsessed from an early age.
That's really neat that you had early experience with an abuela. Helping out with yarrow leaves. Very cool. How did that transition from, say, barrios in Miami to, say, your interest in herbalism, and now ultimately you're living in the Gila National Forest?
Well, plants were such a big thing for me that, and I was also such a library kid. I loved going. I was homeschooled, and I loved going to the library, and I researched every special interest I ever had at great length. I would leave the library with piles of books over my head from the time I was very young, and all the librarians knew me. So at some point I started getting plant books from the library. And it was different back then that, this was in the mid 80s. I at least didn't see any kind of regular herbal books, but I did find some more generic stuff like Rodale's Herbal Encyclopedia, and some stuff even about culinary herbs and spices. And I was just so fascinated by it. Then combined with reading things like Tolkien or other stories that were about using plants for healing or being able to communicate with plants in some way. And this was always a huge thing for me. And it made other people, probably including my parents, a little bit think I was a little bit loony at times. But so even when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was asking my parents if I could have a garden, not because I'm a great gardener, but because I really wanted to see these plants. And I was having wars with my brother about mowing the lawn and about killing potentially useful plants. Don't mow down the dandelions. I'm you have to mow around these. And he's you're insane. Get out of my way. So I had a culinary herb garden, and then I had a medicinal herb garden of whatever kind of stuff that I could gather up from nurseries where I lived. And including sage was one of my favorites. And I would cook with it a lot too, because I was the oldest kid of 4 and my mom had to work a lot. So I did a lot of cooking with herbs. I remember in my parents' basement when I'm like 10 years old, making like herbal vinegar with like McCormick's oregano and thyme or something like that, because I'd read about, I don't know, like Four Thieves vinegar or something like that. And trying all these different things, even as a child, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it did give me some experience with the plants. And then, I had very chaotic teen years, but I never stopped liking plants. And when I was in my early 20s, I ended up living in a swamp in Pennsylvania, like full of hawthorn trees and skunk cabbage and trout lilies. And it was when I first began to learn field botany. And that was really exciting to me, just to be able to identify plants. So, maybe I'm investing a lot of meaning into it, but to me, learning field botany was like learning a secret language.
Wow.
It's still how I often write about field botany, not because these specific Latin names are like inherent to the plants or something like that. It's obviously our human terms for plants and the way we understand them. But the idea that you could put it into a system and know what a plant was by understanding these characteristics was like literally magic to me. And I'm still fascinated by it. And so I started doing that. I started doing some edible wild foods, which my mom was also somewhat into when I was a kid. She was a little bit of a Southern kind of hippie, like still Baptist, but also a little bit hippie. And we used to go gather like wild mulberries and some greens and mushrooms and things, just a little bit, but enough that I knew how to do that. And so when I was living in Pennsylvania, I started to invest myself in that a lot and spend a lot of time identifying and like gathering birch twigs and wintergreen for tea. That's when Inga was very small, and I taught her about it too then. And we would make tea with birch or maple sap and then like decoct the birch twigs into it and eat wintergreen on things. Like it was a lot of experimentation. We did a lot of funny things because I only had I think I had Yule Gibbons or something like that back then. I still didn't have, and I had some field guides.
I was going to ask, were you using like say a botanical key, like say we have here in the Northwest, the Hitchcock?
I do now. Now I love dichotomous keys and stuff.
Okay.
Back then I was just using, I didn't have any money. Like
okay.
I was I had no money and I had a small child. So I had whatever stuff I'd gotten from garage sales or I borrowed from friends, or if I got to the library occasionally. So it was basically confined to a pretty small selection of plants in a lot of ways. I do think I had the Yule Gibbons and some other more survival type plant stuff, but I didn't really learn herbalism and actual field guides and stuff until I moved to New Mexico right after I turned 24. And that's when I really started, because I met other herbalists here, and Wolf already knew, he was friends with Michael Moore, who became my first and main herbal teacher. They had, I don't remember if it was Earth First events or things like that, like ecological green type stuff. They had met and become friends. And he had Michael's book. He had just a couple of them, the Mountain West one and the Desert West one. And when I moved here and found those, I was like, this is what I've always wanted. This is what I've always wanted. And I read them from cover to cover 7 times in a row. And I was like, I can figure this out. I bet I can do this. I had basic knowledge from before that, but I was like, I bet I can actually figure out how to use plants this way. And it happened right about that time. Wolf had been speaking at Green Nations, and he saw Nancy Phillips there, of Heart Song.
Yeah, that name rings a bell.
Yeah, I think she's from Vermont.
Okay.
And he brought back a bunch of tinctures. I don't know if he traded for or bought them. And I don't even know if he knew exactly what they were for, but it was blue vervain and skullcap. And it was really interesting because I have a pretty crazy background that involves a lot of abuse and domestic abuse and living on the streets for a while, and basically a whole lot of trauma. And by the time I came to New Mexico, I had big problems with, I had a severe anxiety disorder. I had major insomnia problems. I had a lot of CPTSD with hypervigilance. Basically, it was really difficult for me to relax at any time, even enough to sleep. And I was having this full-blown anxiety attack, like crying and freaking out. And those tinctures were there. So I tried to suggest a dropper full of, it was like a dropper full of skullcap and like 10 drops of vervain or something like that. And I had the most profound experience.
Wow.
Like, I not only relaxed, but I like laid on the floor and laughed for like 20 minutes or something, just to myself, by myself, because I was like, holy shit, like, is this what it's like to not like be terrified all the time? And that was also a turning point for me. I'm like, I have to be able to make this kind of thing. I have to be able to do this. Like, this experience is incredible to me. And it, I had actually tried prescription anti-anxiety medication before, and it's appropriate for some people some of the time. I'm not being against conventional medicine necessarily at all, but for me, I'm really sensitive to things that affect neurology, like that affect my mind at all, and I wasn't able to do it. Whereas herbs didn't have any of those side effects for me, and I was able to relax and sleep for like the first time in most of my life.
Wow.
And at the same time, so Wolf also had hepatitis C at that time. He'd had it since he was a teenager, when he was riding a motorcycle and rode through a barbed wire fence that he didn't see, and it cut his throat.
Oh my gosh, I never knew. Wow, that's crazy.
and so they gave him blood, and it was before they were scanning the blood banks for hepatitis C. And they gave him hepatitis C. And so it took him a long time to get diagnosed. By the time I met him, he had been diagnosed. But they couldn't really do a lot for him, partly because I don't even know if Harvoni was available at that time, and I don't think it was. And then it was much too expensive considering he didn't have insurance. And so he was trying to treat it herbally. So I was using like Stephen Buhner's book, some, because he already had that. And then I got some books on traditional Chinese medicine, like as how it relates to Hep C. And so my first, like these big steps into herbalism had a lot to do with like necessity, as to take care of Wolf, to take care of myself, as well as like this deep connection to the plants. And so it kind of propelled me into it really fast. Like I took over Wolf's regimen, and I was like, all the books I was reading all at one time, I was like, well, I don't think this herb makes as much sense for him. And then I would research more, and I kept on adjusting things. And so and then I started studying with Michael. And then, I just started practicing on other people too, because what are you going to do with all these plants? So that was that's probably a very long-winded answer to your question.
Well, it's funny because each point you were talking about, I was like, oh man, I want to remember to say that. Oh man, I want to remember to say that. I guess first of all, I got to say blue vervain is also one of my plant allies too. And it is, I feel like maybe I have one of those constitutions where a lot of times I'll need like say a lot of a plant to maybe feel its effects. That's just kind of how I feel. But blue vervain, it is interesting because I could take a few droppers of it, or drops of it, and definitely feel the effects of it.
It's a really interesting plant. Like I've known people that it's absolutely put on the couch after a few drops. Like they're just down for the count. Some people get nauseous from it really easily, but most people don't need large doses. And it's so tension relaxing. It's kind of amazing. Besides being a nervous system trophorestorative overall, like the muscle tension aspect, especially when you combine it with like pedicularis or lobelia, like it's very profound. And I've used it to, I probably learned this from Matthew Wood back in the day too, but used it for some neck injuries where the neck muscles are all tensed up and won't release. And sometimes, especially for myself, I can't always like go to a chiropractor or something because I'm too afraid of injuring it more. And so things like vervain, and I like using cherry tincture topically too for like the hot burning neck tension, and then vervain, lobelia, and pedicularis internally. And man, kava too, of course, sometimes. But that's some profound stuff. And vervain it grows all around me too, like multiple species. There's like Verbena neomexicana. There's Verbena hastata, there's Verbena mcdougallii, and then there's the glandularia species that grow here as well. So it's like a very abundant, and they're all a little bit different. So it's been fun over the years to try one against the other, compare and contrast them, which is one of my favorite things with herbs.
Yeah, I want to ask you a couple questions about the past life part, but I have to ask, is there a particular species that grows in the Gila?
Yes, so there's several, but it's the we're having one of those brain moments.
Sure.
The fernleaf betony, pediculus procera, and it's a big, tall pedicularis with pink flowers. It's one of the very showy ones, and that's the one I use the most because it's very abundant and there's a lot of plant matter on it, as opposed to some of the little tiny ones that I don't like taking as much.
Sure.
So that's the one I most frequently use, and it's super helpful. I've used some species from the Northwest too, because I've had so many friends up there.
Yeah, we got Pediculus groenlandica, the elephant's head, and then yes. Pediculus racemosa, the parrot's beak, and then there's a couple other ones I'm forgetting the species names, but those are the two I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, the fernleaf betony is so pretty because it literally looks like a fern growing out of the ground before it starts flowering, and it has those bright flowers. It grows up a little above here, not in the canyon, but up in the subalpine areas along creeks and things. And it's an amazing plant, and I've seen it do some amazing things for people with autoimmune arthritis and many autoimmune conditions that affect, like, give you chronic pain and muscular tension. Pedicularis can be very profound. It won't usually treat whatever the underlying problem is, but it helps along with other herbs symptomatically so much that it's so worth having.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, staying in your past a little bit, it sounds like your mom was a borderline hippie, but even then, you were still, infatuated with plants, and she would even kind of consider you a weirdo. Is that true?
Yes. I'm definitely the black sheep of the family. I think that my mom is proud of me, and she came to the conference last year actually, and a lot of people met her, and she played her mountain dulcimer there, sitting
really
outside. Yeah, so she's, I think, very into it now. When I was growing up, I think it was like the impracticality of my version of everything, the fact that I actually wanted to be an elf and believed in fairies, and that I made it so much about magic. I don't think she was at all opposed to like herbalism per se, although I'm sure that people around me were probably afraid I was going to poison myself for a while, because that's always one of the most common things of like, don't touch that dandelion, you'll poison yourself. Because especially a lot of mainstream American culture is very plant averse, especially from that time period, and people assume that it's dangerous, which is better than poisoning yourself randomly, of course. But yeah, it was funny. She was okay with me pulling things out of the lawn though, and growing the herbs. But making it into a lifestyle, I think, was kind of not what my family was expecting necessarily. Like, I think I was probably supposed to, go to university, which I did. And then I dropped out. I went really early. I went in my early teens. I skipped a bunch of grades in school. I was homeschooled, then I skipped grades. I went to a private Christian school for a little while, couldn't deal with it, dropped out, got my GED, but got really high scores on that and my standardized test. And so I got accepted into a bunch of universities. And I went to university for a while for like literature, not the most degree, but I was interested in literature. And then I dropped out again because I just couldn't figure out how I would make myself do something conventional or do anything the normal way. Like, always for me, like, I'm often a workaholic and I am happy to work my ass off, but I have to be passionate about it. I am not somebody who can do something just because it's expected to me. I'd literally rather be a homeless person or be starving. I am practical, but like, I have to be able to turn my passions into something. And I've been very blessed that I've been able to do that over and over in my life. To figure out ways of, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I love, this is what I can't give up, and I will find a way to survive doing this.
Yeah, I
which,
do want to say there's there appears to be some parallels between you and our lives, and not like the hyper intelligence part, but like the part where say you went to Michael Moore's and graduated from there as opposed to say regular university. I'm the same way. I went to the Columbine School of Botanical Studies, and I'll take that education over university any day of the week. But
it was an absolute revelation to me to discover that herb schools existed.
yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me? Like when I found out about that stuff, I was like, how come nobody told me this? Like, I remember having like this feeling of betrayal of like, but nobody told me I was allowed to actually do this, that this is a vocation, this is a lifestyle, this is something you can do. Because I mean, I'd seen like shops that, especially in like Hispanic neighborhoods and stuff that do sell herbs. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it like was not offered as an option to me of how you
Totally.
can live your life. And so later on, I was like, man, I should have been doing this from like the get-go. Like I should have like at 14 just gone to herbal school. Like
Yeah, seriously. Kids, go to school, go to herb school.
yeah.
They're everywhere. Yeah, I'm curious about some of your other herbal mentors, but I'd love to hear more about your experience with Michael Moore and if there's any stories you'd like to share.
Well, I mean, most of my stuff was online with him because I couldn't travel and I didn't have the money, etc. But it was a great experience to be able to study with him in that way, especially because I basically memorized his books. And also, of course, Howie taught a bunch of his classes at his school. And I learned so much and in such a very different way. So when I learned physiology and anatomy, when I learned phytochemistry and stuff through there, it was told in such a totally different way that I'd been taught in conventional schooling. And it was, I don't know, I feel like Howie and Michael both have like a profound gift for translating some very difficult concepts into something knowable and accessible for all of us. I still quote Michael almost every time I teach because he had such profound insights that, and he gave a lot of credit to other people that he learned it from. He was very self-deprecating. He had a great sense of humor. I love his stories about his adventures. And Donna his wife attended the conference on multiple occasions, and it was such a blessing to meet her. She's always been extremely kind to me and so supportive of the conference and everything we're doing, which like I could barely talk to her the first time. I almost fell down dead from like, rock star effect. I'm like, oh my God, it's Donna. Like I almost cried.
Fangirling.
I had the first conference we had, like one of the main purposes of it was so that I could meet people that I knew online from the herbal community. Yeah. And it was so meaningful to me for that, because I've never really cared much about regular celebrities or whoever, but the people I've learned from in the herbal community matter so much to me. I feel like they've offered so much healing to the world, so much knowledge and skill that could be lost otherwise. I still very much appreciate Michael. He definitely changed my life. Like, I know that's like an overused way of saying things, but it's really true for me. I read those books, and it changed my relationship with the land too, because you don't view it just as a landscape or like as green noise. It's
Yep.
something like with a personality. It's something with many personalities. It's something always full of intelligent life that you can access and get to know and interact with. Like, and I feel like even if you love nature, it doesn't always grant you like a portal into like a deeper relationship, right? Sometimes it's more like scenery or an adventure, and that's great and valid too. But there's this different level of connecting with the plants. And part of that for me is always knowledge as well as experience, my personal emotional experience with it, but also the hands-on practical, like living with the land, not just living off of it, not just living on it, but living with it, so that the land itself and the plants, the animals, etc., are all people with personalities and their own lives happening, which is, I didn't know anything about ecology or whatever at that point, really. And it was my personal experience with herbs that made me much more interested in that.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on say like getting on your hands and knees and looking at tiny flowers through
Yeah.
loops, as opposed to say just trudging through the woods on a hike. You know, like I'm learning more and more as I get older. You know, when I'm out in the woods, it's nice to actually just find a spot like off the trail and then just chill for a bit. And that's
Yeah.
almost more intimate than, you know, just walking through the
Yep.
woods and then walking back, because then you actually have time to spend time with the plants. And yeah, I want to say like taking an in-person herb school is so valuable. Like HerbRally is
Yeah.
an online platform, Plant Healer is an online platform, and it's all well and good. I almost think of it as like an addendum to taking like
Yeah.
a traditional in-person herb school. So
Yeah. I mean, I think both have their place, and
yeah,
sometimes, especially, we do the online stuff by necessity, especially if we live in isolated areas.
yeah,
I would have loved to have gone to in-person herb school, and that was also part of the conference because I got to take classes
right,
with so many people, meet so many people, and it definitely like made my relationships with teachers much more personal too, because I met them in person and then also maintained like, you know, talking to them online and through email and stuff. So, but yeah, to be with other people in real time in the forest or whatever, looking at plants, it's definitely its own experience. Like, it's irreplaceable.
yeah. Well, this seems like a nice transition. I was wanting to ask you about this because you and I talked the other day on the Good Medicine Confluence Roundtable, kind of reminiscing on the old herbal blog days that, like, I'd maybe say like the late 2009, 2010, that kind of thing. I was just curious if you want to like go down memory lane and kind of, you know, tell stories about what it was like back then. I want to say for me personally, maybe it was just my time of life, but like that's when I started really getting into herbalism and the herbal community, and just there was like this whole herbal blog scene. You were a huge part of
Yep.
it, and I was just kind of curious if you want to chat a bit about those times. Do you feel like the herbal community is like still thriving in the same way? Does it feel different now? You know, just kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, it was much smaller, at least the online, that particular part of the herbal community, right, was much smaller. So I think my original herbal community experience actually started on the Susan Weed forum, like back forever ago, and then the Herb Wifery forum with Rebecca Crabapple. And this was all as Facebook was happening, but also before Facebook became a thing. And so it was one of the only ways of, like, besides the forums, of communicating with other people. Like, now we don't have like a dearth of ways to communicate, right? Like, you can go on Instagram, you can go on TikTok, you can go anywhere, say herbs, and there will be a lot of people. And
Right.
it's amazing, and it's fantastic that so many more people are open to herbs, that herbalism is far more accessible financially and in most other ways as well to people. Like, I'm really happy about that. I do think it's harder outside of certain kinds of groups to find the kind of like the intimacy of those early days. And also, I think people feel a lot more self-conscious on social media than they used to. Maybe I'm wrong. It feels that way to me. I know when I first started writing my blog, I told myself that nobody would ever read it because I didn't even tell anybody. I didn't tell a single
Like a
person.
journal, more like a journal.
Yeah, I didn't even tell any of my friends. I was just like
Yeah.
exploding with like wanting to talk about herbalism, and it was definitely my special interest. And poor Wolf, like, I think his ears were probably like bleeding from me never shutting up night and day talking blah 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 blah, which is what I do when I'm excited about stuff. And so I needed a place to write it down. I also wanted to like record it, and so that's what I started doing. And I was actually really shocked when people started subscribing. I was kind of like, I remember the day that David Hoffman like subscribed to my blog, and I like almost dropped dead. Like, I couldn't stop squealing or whatever. Like, but there a bunch of people were blogging, right? And we had these blog parties, which was really fun. We pick a theme for, I think it was like once a month, and we'd all write about that theme, whether it was like, you know, like a winter cold recipe or about a specific plant or experience that we'd had. And then we'd all link to each other so that it was a way of networking and doing the social media thing before it really existed as such. And once Facebook hit, we would also share it there too. I was also the moderator of, like, I don't know if anybody remembers, but the tribe forums. Like,
Comment below if you remember.
Right. And I don't know how, I think Chuck Garcia was on there, and he gave me the huge tribe group that he was moderating, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And I did that for a while too. So it was like so much like focused going into the herbal community all at one time, talking to so many people. And it was really fun because I just met so many people based completely around, loving plants and nothing else. Yeah. Like for most of these people, it wasn't even their business, or it was a side business to their, whatever day job, because herbalism wasn't as much of a possible vocation, I think, right then. And I made so many great friends that way. Like, I have to say that pretty much all of my long-term friends that I have to this day, I initially met online talking about herbs. And then I met them in person. It created like really strong bonds, which is something I feel like is often harder to do on social media now, just because of how things are so flooded. Yeah. And you can have Facebook groups and stuff, yeah, but people are also much more like, I think they're kind of wary because of people getting scammed, people getting, all the stuff that comes along with social media is difficult. And for people who are older, it's often difficult for them to like incorporate into that too, because it seems pretty crazy to them. Like Wolf at least does not want to be on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, none of it. That's mine and Inga's jobs. I'm fine with, but like, it's more challenging. Back when it was the blogging days, he blogged as well, back on the Anima blog, and I had the herbal blog. And I had so much fun just like writing a middle of the night thought about a plant and sharing it with people, and then reading people's comments and being able to talk to them. Like, there were some negative experiences, because there always is online, you know, but for the most part, it was incredibly supportive and a great way of connecting with people and learning new information.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost created like an unintentional audience. And is that kind of when you thought of the idea, there's people reading my blog, this might be a good idea to create an herbalism event, and then gather a lot of my best friends in the herbal community?
Well, the conference was actually Wolf's idea, and it was because I couldn't stop talking about wanting to meet people in person, and we couldn't like get everybody to come here because this is the canyon is not exactly the most accessible location, and like I wanted to go to classes, I wanted to teach classes, like I just wanted to do all these things, and I think I was kind of chaotic about it at the time. I'm just like this and this and this, and he's like, why don't we just start an event? Like he's organized plenty of things working for other organizations in the past. He's like, we can do it. And I'm like, oh my god, what? And we actually had to take a small loan from a friend, and I didn't even know most of the people we invited to that conference. Because of the blog, a lot of those people did somehow know who I was. Like I talked to David Winston, and they like actually people knew who I was, and I was like, how? Like, so I was able to get people to come to that first event, and I couldn't believe that people bought tickets. And I was like, if we can make 100, like we'll be able to pay back the loan. We'll have like broke even. Yeah. And then when we got like, I don't know, it was like 300 or 400 people or whatever, and they all showed up at Ghost Ranch. Yeah. I about lost my mind. Like I couldn't sleep the entire event because I was so wound up about all of it. And it was such a beautiful experience. So many people came up and talked to me about stuff that I'd just written on my blog. It was hard for me to believe that people cared that much about basically my ramblings endlessly.
Did you teach a class at that first event?
Yes, I think I taught basically like a materia medica class that covered a bunch of different southwestern herbs. Like I think I used the same name as my blog, something like the Medicine Woman's Roots or something like that. And so I taught about, and I had a full class, and that was also like and I also taught with Jim McDonald that first year, and I was so grateful to him. Like Jim has been a great friend and a great mentor since the very beginning. And he also helped me learn how to teach. because I'm fine talking a lot, but presented with a large audience of people who I feel like might know a lot more than me, even because I hadn't been doing it for that long. I was like, I don't know, 25 or 26 or something like that. And I would get like a little frozen in the middle of it. And Jim, you know, he's great. He would like just prompt me and we'd get going again, like having one of our endless conversations about plants that we really like. And that was so much fun. And that's definitely one of my fondest memories of my whole life, is that first conference and meeting Jim and teaching with him.
That's a good piece of advice for someone who, say, wants to get into herbal teaching, is to just do it with a close buddy who maybe have a more experience teaching. So now we're fast forwarding. You've been doing this, I want to say, for 13 events. And it's kind of cool. You get to pass along your expertise to your daughter, Inga, who you're going to be co-teaching a class with at this year's Good Medicine Confluence. So maybe this is a good moment to kind of talk about the upcoming event in July.
Yep, it's the third week of July. And it's our first time. We've had it in Colorado for a number of years, but this is the first year that we're having it on the East Slope in Colorado, and we're having it at a retreat center that's right bordered by the wilderness. There's a river running through it. We were trying to bring it back more to the roots of like being out in the woods as much as possible. And so this year also, we have an amazing mix of teachers. Many of them are new that we've never had before, and some of them have been coming for many, many years. And I think when I talked to you before, I called it, you know, well, Wolf calls it a potion. I call it a special kind of alchemy because of the mix of, you know, ecology, herbalism, botany, mycology, philosophy, like very hands-on approach to medicine making, like just straight up the most practical workshops, combined with then also classes and lectures about things that some people would consider much more esoteric, and also subjects like alchemy and spagyrics, things that they're becoming increasingly common, but I still feel like there's not enough information out there for the average herbalist. And so I love for people to be able to come to the event and explore many different avenues, many different paths. Like, you know, I've had a lot of people ask me when they first start studying herbalism about like, what kind of herbalism should they get into? Like, because there's many different ways to be an herbalist. There's not one way. Like, it doesn't always mean working in a clinic. It doesn't always mean being a wildcrafter. It doesn't always mean, you know, even working with herbs medically necessarily. Like, it could be any of those things. It could be all of those things. But I think for a lot of people, it's overwhelming at the beginning. Like, how do you do this? Because there's not a set path, and nor should there be. But so one of the things that we try to provide with the conference is a way for people to go in and explore a lot of different options, a lot of different ways of looking at herbalism, of understanding herbalism, of, you know, experiencing connection to the plants. And so we try to have this big diversity of viewpoints and ways of practicing so that people can find what most aligns with them, what most resonates with the way they want to go forward. And then I think it makes it easier for them to choose an herb school, to choose a path for their herbal vocation, without going in blind. Like, you have a little bit, and you have a ways of connecting to other people who are interested in that path. And I feel like we're doing that, especially this year, that we've focused a lot on bringing in people who work with plants in many, many different ways. And you can see that in the class descriptions, like everybody from, you know, medical doctors to people who basically consider themselves like priestesses, to people who are doing like ecological work, to activists, to, I mean, just like this whole range, people who grow plants. And I love that there's just so many different ways of connecting, and that we can all work together and create a community where we all support each other without having to do the same thing.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, there's like 108 classes. I can't remember how many teachers there are, but
over
I will
40.
say, okay, yeah, 40. So there's the 40 teachers, but then if you're an attendee, one of the best parts is just hanging out, not even with the teachers per se, although that's a great part too, but like the other attendees as well. So on the side, in between classes, during lunch and whatnot, you get to just like nerd out with people with similar interests as you.
Yeah, and then you can also talk to people and ask them questions about like, how did this go for you? Did you enjoy this experience? Like, and I still learn that kind of thing myself every year when I talk to participants, when I talk to the teachers, whatever. Like, it's a great way to get feedback and also just to be able to share your passion, which that's one of the biggest purposes of the conference for me, is like, passion is a little bit like conducting electricity. And I think when you bring people together, it amplifies the existing individual passion into something larger, and it makes us way more powerful and able to create more change and more beauty in the world.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like going to an herbal event. I'm stoked for y'all. It's going to be an amazing event. I've been to the event twice. Had a great time. Highly recommend it. You can learn more at planthealer.org/gmc.html. I also want to say, just the other day, we recorded we called it the Good Medicine Confluence Roundtable, where we had on 10 teachers or so, including Kiva, and we spent 10-minute segments with each presenter, and we chatted a bit about, like, say, what they're teaching at the conference, along with some other fun questions as well. So if you'd like to learn more about the event, you could watch that episode or listen to it. That's like 2 or 3 episodes back when you're listening to this. So yeah, anything else you want to say about the conference, Kiva?
I don't know. One of the things about this year for me that's really special is that I was sick for a number of years, and so was Wolf, and we still continue to have the conference, but I've been a little bit like, I've had to focus so much on the managing aspect to keep everything going that I haven't been able to really enjoy it like I used to. And so this year is the first year that I'm really much more healthy and much more like, I think I'll be able to be way more present. And so I'm personally very excited for this reason to reconnect with people that I haven't had a chance to talk to in a long time, to be able to go to classes myself, especially now that Ailfin is 5. And so he can like stay with his sister or his papa for a while, and I can go to classes. And so for me, like, I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone who comes, because I feel like it will be some kind of anniversary event for me, because it'll be like going back to being able to really be a participant myself.
Yeah, you're gonna have a great time. So you are teaching a class with Inga, but then you're also teaching a class on I want to say it was yellow pond lily, birch, and ground ivy. Is that true?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, sweet. I remembered. Let's give the audience some of what they want. They're here for the plant. So are you able to give a brief preview, say, on some of what you might be talking about regarding, say, yellow pond lily?
Well, part of what I'm talking about in the class is also mythology and folklore, but I am talking quite a bit about medicinal aspects as well. And I feel like pond lily is a plant that it's not unknown in the herbal community, but it's not as well known. And I will be talking quite a bit about its effect on the reproductive and pelvic area, but also some of its nervine effects, and like what we might call like vibrational or spiritual effects. And I don't want to give too much away here, actually.
Okay. That's totally fine.
I think, because I want to go into great depth in the class, and so I don't need to surface here with it.
Well, that's just a little teaser for you then. All right, HerbRally. Do you want to talk about any other plants? Some other plants that I brought up besides the ones you're talking about in the class are, I saw you post about damiana the other day, which was a particular interest to me. So if you want to maybe chat a little bit, I'll give you some options. We got damiana, hawthorn, and violet. So if you want to run with any of those.
Wow, like those are hard choices. But damiana is really important to me right now, because after I had Ailfin 5.5 years ago, I had a lot of health issues, and I ended up, partly because of physiological deficiency, but I also ended up with postpartum depression that lasted a really long time. And it really interacted a lot with my existing CPTSD, and I became very detached feeling from the world, from my body, from everything sensory. And it became very problematic. Like, I'm okay living in my head. Like, I like writing fantasy stories, but at some point it becomes a problem that you're that detached. And in the past, I worked with damiana a lot with clients, but not myself, because I actually found it too stimulating. So in damiana originally was too stimulating for me, which I know a lot of people use it as a relaxant and also as an aphrodisiac, right? But for me, it felt like caffeine. And even a small amount would make me feel too buzzed. And I think I wrote that on my blog all those years ago. And so I hadn't really tried it again very much for myself, you know, except for like blended with cacao or things like that at the conference. We would do that sometimes in the evenings. But so I hadn't really worked with it like in an intense way personally. So when I had this kind of detached depression that ended up with, for the first time in my life, I felt kind of like hopeless and apathetic about things. I've definitely fell into the trap of feeling a bit nihilistic even. And I didn't like that feeling at all, because I'm usually an incredibly passionate person who's in touch with what she likes and dislikes and is like excited about life, even if I'm angry about it. Like I don't usually lack for feeling. And so that was a really disturbing experience. So for whatever reason, it came to me that damiana was a plant that I needed to work with. And not even because of like, you know, it's infamy for being an aphrodisiac or whatever. It wasn't that at all. It was that I wanted to like be able to experience the world through my body again. And man, like, you know, sometimes when you get the right plant, when it's the specific herb that you need, like that perfect matchmaking process, just having the tea and the tincture, like even small amounts in a day, I would feel like somebody turned all the lights back on inside me. And it was literally like feeling switches coming on, and I would feel excited, and like my body would feel like alive, and I would feel anticipation about things. And this is something that I feel like damiana, I've seen it with clients too, but I hadn't experienced it myself. So it was like, you know, another one of those revelation moments for me where, and at first, like it would be very temporary. It would last for like a couple of hours, and then I would go back to feeling like sad and detached and just kind of distant from things. But as I kept taking it, I would take it like 3 or 4 times a day, and I took it that way for a few months. I was also healing from the pernicious anemia at the time, and it gave me a huge boost towards being more fully healed and helping me deal with the depression aspect. My memory started working quite a bit better as well, because I'd had short-term memory issues. It seemed like it helped quite a bit with some nerve pain and neuropathy that I was struggling with, because I focused pretty much just on this one herb during that time. Like because that's one of the things I like to do, is one herb at a time, so I know what's going on when I first get to know a plant. And so I was basically, that was the only herb I was taking during that time so that I could feel the effects. And over time, as I was taking it, I didn't need to take it as much. And now I only take it like sporadically, like as needed, basically, when I'm feeling a little bit down or if I'm having some hormonal issues. But it's amazing that it created this transition in me of bringing me out of like this foggy, detached thing. And I know that people talk about damiana that way, but it's one thing to read about a plant, and it's a whole nother thing to experience it in like a long-term profound way for yourself. And, you know, damiana is not everyone's answer to depression or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but for me, it was the exact right plant it made me feel reconnected to all plants. So I've often talked about how, for me, plants in particular, more even than people, more than animals, more than anything else in the world, plants like kind of have an inner light to me, like they glow. And when I was really depressed, it was really hard to see that. And I felt like something in me had basically died to not be able to access that. And damiana like immediately like kind of made everything glow again, which is a very abstract way of describing it, but it was very significant for me. And I didn't have to even keep taking it. Like I felt like that plant gave me such a huge gift. And like I wasn't even taking huge doses of it, because again, I think that sometimes you can use lower doses when it's the exact perfect thing, especially for a nervous system or neurological issue. So, and I'm so grateful that people are able to provide more sustainable options for damiana too, since it's not one that can be easily grown generally in most climates. And there has been some concern about, you know, it being ethical and sustainable. And I feel like we've made some progress in that area. It's still not an herb that I just go around telling everybody to take. Usually, like,
does it grow in the Gila?
No,
okay.
we're at 6,000 feet.
Okay.
And we're pretty much way too cold for and dry, I think, for it. I would love to be able to grow it though. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I remember it was popular for a while when I was working at Mountain Rose Herbs. Giant, like say, herbal smoking blend companies, like not even like the righteous cool ones that we all know and love, but like the mass produced ones. They would just
Yes.
buy, I don't even know, probably thousands of pounds at once. So I remember they would set limits on like how much they would sell at one time to particular
Yes.
vendors and whatnot. But yeah, I call that my like show herb or my event herb. I would take damiana anytime I did like say like some sort of not herb conference per se, but like say like a trade show. And I
Right.
would, have to talk to people for 10 hours a day at a
Oh my
booth.
God.
So yeah, I would be dosing on damiana all the time. And people would be like, "Ooh, aphrodisiac," and I'm like, "No, it's not like that for me. It just kind of
Yeah.
like puts a pep in my step or whatever." So yeah, I love damiana, and I saw that you wrote about it recently on
Yes.
your Instagram. So I felt compelled to ask you about it. I was going to ask you who is doing like say all of your Instagram artwork these days. It's really pretty.
Some of it's stuff that I've pulled from Wolf, some of it's stock art, some of it's just
Okay.
from like I have Canva Pro, like,
Oh
and that's really helpful. Like I love aesthetics.
yeah.
And so I like to like take stuff, like I take Wolf stuff and then I combine it with other things and like try to turn it into something pretty and attractive that gives the vibe and feel of how I experience herbalism basically.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's like
Oh, thank you.
cohesive. Like looking at it, it's just like it tells a story, and yeah, I really dig it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I also saw you write about trophorestoratives on your Instagram, and I remember that term kind of gaining traction a few years ago, and I always really liked the term. So I was just kind of curious for the audience who may not know what a trophorestorative is. Do you mind like defining that?
So in herbalism, when we're talking about trophorestoratives, we're talking about an herb that not only like stimulates or sedates or something like that, but also that it actually restores tone, it restores function to the body and whatever system of the body we're talking about. So with a nervous system trophorestorative, it may relax you and it may stimulate you, but that's not all that it does. So a plant like milky oats is a nervous system trophorestorative because it helps to rebuild functionality in the nervous system to make us less brittle, less reactive, and more resilient, more calm, more able to come, experience your nervous system from a place of balance and wellness.
Okay.
And so these are very important herbs because when you have a body system that's gotten deficient, it's gotten damaged, this is a way of helping to rebuild its overall health and bring it back to more complete functioning.
Would like say milky oats be a good example of that?
Yep. Yep. Milky oats is one of my favorite nervous system trophorestoratives. I also consider skullcap and vervain that we were talking about earlier very important. They also combine really well with milky oats for that. Also, wood betony is another nervous system trophorestorative. And so in all of the different body systems that we talk about in herbalism, we have trophorestoratives. I think I've talked most about the nervous system ones, because I see like you can heal so much better on every other part of your body if you are also feeling well, like in your mind, spirits, psychology aspect, which, your nervous system is a huge part of that. And so these herbs are often foundational when I'm looking at someone who's having chronic problems, chronic health issues, and it's clear that chronic stress, which most of us experience, but it's like manifesting a lot in their psychology and nervous system, then these herbs can be profoundly helpful, even when you think they're not something that will apply to the issue that they're specifically coming to you for.
Well, thanks for clearing that up for us. Trophorestorative, yeah. So as my herb mentor Howie Brownstein says, repetition is the key to mastery. So it's always good reminder for me, and I'm sure for the audience, to kind of hear that those definitions over and over and over and over again. So final question, just curious, what keeps you passionate? What keeps you learning and growing in the field of herbalism?
For me, herbalism has always been first and foremost about the plants and wanting to have a relationship with the plants and wanting to understand them better. So in some ways that's very selfish because it's about my experience first and foremost. But when I realized like the profound and amazing experiences that you can have with plants, I also I felt like this overwhelming desire to share it with other people. And so that's part of why I've been a clinician, why I've been a writer, because anything that I'm excited about, I love to share with others. But like working as a clinician, I got myself pretty burned out for a while, because that can be very intense work, and you're dealing with other people's suffering a lot. And it's also very demanding. Like you're constantly under that stress to do things just right. And for me, and running the conference too can also be very stressful, like trying to make things be perfect, having last minute disasters. Like you get like at some points you're like, can I keep doing this because I'm really stressed out right now? Like, and for me, when I get burned out, when I get really stressed out, I always take myself back to the plants, like one-on-one, and to remind myself how much I love working with them, and also to revitalize my passion. And so that's one way, and it's been maybe the longest term way since I was a very small child. It's just to constantly go back and hang out with the plants, sit in the forest. The other part for me with herbalism, because it's also so much about the community, is that I do feel like in-person events, especially, like talking to other people about their passion for plants is hugely inspiring to me. And it's also another way that I keep my passion alive. It's why I also go online. I look for like random new people's blogs or social media. Like I don't even necessarily need to talk to them, but I want to see other people who are so excited, who are in love with the plants, who, feel called to be a healer in some way. And so those two things, once again, it's like everything in my life, plants and people coming together is what keeps me very passionate and very sure that this is the right path for me.
Great answer. What you were saying at first about the whole selfish part, like I interviewed KP Kalsi yesterday, and he kept saying, "Oh, I love that plant," and I'm like, "Oh, do you take that plant?" He goes, "No, I like sharing it with other people," and I did that numerous times throughout the interview, and I just thought it was super funny. Like he doesn't like the plant per se for his own use. He likes being able to share it with the other people.
Yes.
So
it's a big deal, like especially if you like perfectly match make with someone and you see it have like this crazy effect on them, and they're like, wow, I've never felt this way before, or like, wow, I never thought that I would feel better in this way or have this experience. Like if you can, it seems like how could you not want to be able to do that with people? And that's part of why I write as well, even when I can't add more clinical stuff. I still want to write and talk to people about it. It's even why I do the conference. Like it's another way of offering plants to people.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to wrap up the show. Again, check out planthealer.com. I fucked it up. Let's try that again. So to learn more about the event, the Good Medicine Confluence, I'll leave the dates in the show notes because I forgot them for some reason. But like Kiva said, it's the third week in July. Planthealer.org.
You can just tell people
I don't have it pulled up. There you go. Go to planthealer.org. Of course, give Kiva Rose a follow on Instagram. What's your @ Is it @ Kiva Rose?
Kiva Rose Thorn.
Kiva Rose Thorn, that's right. Oh, can you quickly tell us what the why you like the ringtail? I want to say that used to be a part of your name.
Yeah, so ringtail cats, which are not lemurs, they're related to raccoons and coati here in the Southwest. And so they look a little bit like cats, they look a little bit like raccoons, and they live up in the trees. You'll very rarely see them on the ground. They're very mischievous, and I've had several experiences of them like looking in the window at me. I love like small mischievous creatures who get into trouble. Like they get in trouble with ranchers for stealing fruit, and also with campers for stealing like bars or food out of their backpacks. So, like ringtails and foxes and similar creatures that are a bit mischievous and get into a little bit of trouble and like annoy people but are still adorable. I kind of relate to that.
Oh, I love that answer, because I want to say I've been told one of my spirit animals is a raccoon, so it feels kind of like a similar.
A trash panda.
Trash panda, exactly. And I like dumpster diving, and yeah, exactly. It's a perfect
I love
fit.
raccoon. They're another one of my favorites.
So planthealer.org/gmc.html. I pulled up the website. I got it dialed in, and it's July 18th to the 22nd in Lake George, Colorado. Definitely check it out. Get out there and hang out with some plant people at an herb conference this year if you can. So thanks so much for joining us on the show today, Kiva. I really hope you had a good time. I certainly did, and hope you all tune into the next episode.